So welcome to class, everyone. This week's discussion is about the origins of World War II and how to teach it to second language learners. So as the QEP secondary cycle 2 states, students are asked to characterize a historical turning point, and of course World War II is a historical turning point, and to interpret a social phenomenon using the historical method. So this is why we picked this topic. And because of multiple learning styles, we thought that combining different approaches would be really interesting for students who learn English as a second language, but also for students in general in schools. So yeah, combining approaches seems better than just isolating one method. This way you can reach different learning styles. So media was chosen as a tool to teach students, and it's been proven to be a very useful tool, and it's also specifically useful for students for ESL students, and media is so like everywhere now, especially for students you're gonna teach, then they're gonna love it. There are different type of media we can use in in this type of teaching, like digital storytelling, posters, films, songs, oral history, radio broadcasts from the era. So you had multiple choices, and I'm really excited to see what you guys did about it. And what you were also asked to do for the chosen media was to offer the description of your media. Then you need to explain how teachers can use it in their classroom, and you also need to offer some project that students can do with the media you chose. So let's hear what you have to say.
All right, so I have explored the use of oral history in a social science class and its use to ESL students, so I think this is a great way to do so. Generally speaking, oral history is a collection of the memories and first-hand accounts of the past from living people. Generally, its focus is on the personal stories, so that it can offer students a historical perspective other than the one that is found usually in textbooks or the other dominant narratives. Currently, there are many oral history projects that have collected thousands of hours of interviews from ordinary men and women, in addition to people who have actually held positions of power and been influential in decision making. And many of these interviews are available free online from a number of archives. Topics of these interviews and projects range anywhere from everyday life in Montreal and Quebec society to the experiences of migration and dislocation, as well as key political and social events in Quebec, Canadian, and global history. Many of these projects have been used already in high school classrooms since the 1960s, and they can bring a great number of benefits, especially for those who are learning English as a second language. So first of all, oral history gives students actual context for better understanding a historical period or event. So in our case, about the origins of the Second World War, listening to oral history interviews can help students to develop their understanding of various historical concepts covered in class or covered in the textbook, and it can help flesh out some of these ideas by creating a context for learning so that students can actually begin to witness how some of the historical concepts actually operate in people's lives. Such questions they can address are what were the causes of war and how did it affect the lives of everyday people in their work, in their home life, in their family life, what sort of sacrifices were made, and interestingly, what were some of the effects it had on young people like themselves. Students in this way would be able to analyze, synthesize, and evaluate new information in new ways. For ESL students in particular, research suggests that oral history interviews in general can help develop listening strategies, allowing them to apply their background knowledge in history to begin to discern the meaning of the speakers and by making connections and listening for specific details. So oral language and the real-life experiences from the interviewees can be used as a basis to improve basic literacy skills, and by connecting this everyday language to more formal speech, students can develop their proficiency in academic language and historical language specifically. Researchers have also suggested linking the content of interviews to the making of concept maps, brainstorming, writing various drafts of papers and other projects, editing and revising. And I think that perhaps the most exciting possibility for oral history is that it is actually project-based, so that students can actually create their own oral history projects and conduct their own interviews. So again, there's a range of topics that students can explore from their own family and community histories or otherwise. So in our case, teaching World War II, students can interview members of their family, members of their community, speak to them about their experiences during this time. The interview subjects that were chosen would not have to have played any significant role in the war. Oral history rather encourages us to look at how people actually experienced the lived sort of reality of these historical events. So students could interview their own parents even, understanding how subsequent generations have experienced the war. So in classes with ESL learners specifically, this kind of project can be broadened so that students can begin to interview each other about their schooling experiences, about their cultural roots, or about their immigration experiences if they have any. So doing this, one study actually found that students were more focused, more engaged in revising their drafts and doing additional research so that they can improve their own narratives, their own language, and their own content. And this was much more, they were much more readily to do so when they themselves were the subject of the research. So in this way, the study found that oral history projects can actually promote cultural responsiveness, they called it, among teachers and among students by validating students' lived histories and making their histories part of the content that was studied. Going even further, students' diverse cultural knowledge, their different frames of reference, their various learning styles, these can all inform the way that content is taught in the classroom, obviously to the benefit of all involved. So in addition to motivating students in the study of history, oral history projects promote language and writing development, especially when developing appropriate questions and transcribing interviews. They also can develop oral skills and interviewing techniques, while also incorporating students' voices into the study of history, as well as the study of language more broadly. Oral history has been used as a way to incorporate marginalized voices, people who have been marginalized on account of their race, their class, gender, sexual orientation, language, religion, ethnicity, so that actually applying oral history methods in the secondary school classrooms can have great potential to integrate learners of diverse backgrounds and their experiences into a truly inclusive classroom. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Anna and I will be discussing how digital storytelling can help and improve student language learning. I will briefly explain the definition of digital storytelling and its use in a history classroom, specifically on World War II, and then I will expand on how this type of media can enhance ESL language learning for both the teacher and the student. So let's begin. So first of all, what is digital storytelling? Well, storytelling has been the oldest form of teaching and it has been a great way to learn. But digital storytelling actually contains a mixture of computer-based images, text, recorded audio, video, and music. So here are some of the reasons why we use digital storytelling into our teaching. First, it appeals to the different learning styles of students. It develops communication and multimedia skills. It is encouraging, self-motivated, and self-directed. It engages students in their own learning process. And finally, it helps students to develop planning skills, their creativity, and innovation skills. More importantly, how is this activity of digital storytelling achieved within an educational practice? Well, students and teachers can build on each other's ideas, and students can compare their stories with those authored by people from other cultures and life experiences. And also, it provides students with alternative tools for learning about curricular topics and other time periods to create teaching practices that will engage and motivate students in creative ways. So as the teacher, you can divide the assignment into the following phases. First, you can start with brainstorming. Then you can start the scripting process, which is writing the story out. Storyboarding, recording and editing, so that includes the software programs like Audacity, iMovie, and Movie Maker. And then you can fine-tune and add the titling, and eventually present the final version. So in a World War II classroom, for a project, students can create the digital stories by using their computers, laptops, iPads, and if there's only one computer available, you can work in teams for that. So within their stories, each group will choose between a different theme associated with World War II. That includes Nazism, concentration camps, communism, and/or fascism. So as a reminder, students do not have to provide purely factual descriptions of the topic. Rather, they should produce stories that communicate personal stories from World War II. And that means that when students compose a work, they should focus on a person, either imagined or real, which is to become the center of their story. So for example, students who decide to make a story about a concentration camp can use multiple resources located both inside and outside the classroom, such as meeting and interviewing a first-hand witness or relative of the survivor of the camp. So for non-fiction digital stories that incorporate elements of a good story, this should have ability to translate complex historical and political ideas that guide deeper understandings rather than retelling or repeating information. And it also has to relate the cause and effect of a dilemma. And so when we want to ask questions like, what is the personal story and meaning for our lives, community, and nation? Or how did the actions on the home front make a difference in the war? Now when we move forward for ESL learning, digital storytelling as instruction is one of the most beneficial tools for second language learners. It offers an easy way for language educators to integrate technology with their teaching, and it helps students blend personal empowerment with community responsibility. So this foundation of a successful language learning practice includes building language awareness, practicing the meaningful use of language for communicative purposes, using technology to personalize that learning experience, which can communicate with others. Finally, you want to develop the primary skills of speaking, listening, reading, and finally writing. Students learning a new language are often hesitant to speak in front of large audiences, and sometimes this becomes frustrating when they want or when they can't find the words to express themselves. So this activity begins with planning a storyboard of images or videos, along with what the author wants to say. This is a great opportunity for students to work with a peer or a teacher to make sure everything the student wants to communicate translates clearly in English. The use of translation websites allows students to hear the correct pronunciation of English. And because several languages are presented within an ESL classroom, students can use visual images to learn about classmates and even share their personal stories. So hopefully this will break down the communication barrier between the students and have them feel a bit better and comfortable. So finally, digital storytelling is this activity that can engage and motivate students and teachers in a new and influential way. It can provide the student with an opportunity to use popular culture and a local knowledge in their creation. Students can also make stories about topics connected to different subjects in the curriculum, thanks to the tool's ability to be flexible and adaptable. And finally, it offers different tools to express themselves, and then what has been traditionally been offered in the classroom.
So I always had a great experience with learning history content through film. So when brainstorming a method that would work well for teaching ESL students, that medium became a natural starting point. I think the use of film, especially of a documentary nature, allows ESL students to get a visual feel for a historical period rather than depending solely on a textual description. I thought it could also help ESL students to decipher symbolic interpretations of film and to express that in their second language. Film analyses are opinions after all, they're neither right nor wrong, and this sort of activity may help ESL students develop and support their own arguments, an important skill in any language. I found a peer-reviewed article in the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy which points to the merits of film analysis for ESL students. So choosing the film would be a pretty important step in the success of my lesson plan. I thought since we were looking at the run-up to the beginning of World War II, there'd be no better place to start than the Nazi propaganda machine, specifically looking at the 1935 film Triumph of the Will. I think this is a good choice for ESL students because A, it has no dialogue of prime importance and no complicated plot to confuse second language learners. There are speeches in German, they're subtitled in English, interspersed throughout the film, but much of what they say is irrelevant to the activity. The viewing of the film could be prefaced with a lesson on the tenets of Nazism to give some context to the speeches. Another reason I think it's good is it's full of symbolism and imagery and music for ESL students to analyze and argue over. The film's acclaimed for its technical achievement in aerial photography and other pioneering techniques, as well as its use of music. This is where ESL students and the classroom at large can look at kind of the deeper level symbolism and semantics of the film, understanding how propaganda looks and how it is created, and exploring how to explain these effects in their second language. They could practice how to construct an argument and support it with visual evidence from the film. And the last reason is it just touches on important history content, that of propaganda in the run-up to the conflict. So I think the movie would be viewed in parts relating to the different pillars of Nazi propaganda, stuff like the bandwagon effect, religious imagery, the cult of personality around Hitler, repetition and stereotyping in the speeches, just to name a few things. The students would have a preface lesson on the tenets of propaganda, including a definition of terms and difficult language. I thought we could tie in some Trump-Clinton campaign commercials to modernize the concept of propaganda for a younger audience and help them understand what they will see in Triumph of the Will. So then finally the students would view the film. I think the first 30 minutes is more than enough. The idea is to have students point concretely to the symbols, images, and techniques the director uses in this propaganda piece. I'd imagine a handout which could accompany different sections with multiple choice questions, fill in the blank, and opinion questions. These viewing handouts could take a universal design depending on the abilities of each individual student. Example questions might be like, what sort of feeling does the music convey during the aerial shots of the plane flying over Nuremberg? Your choices could look like A, regal, B, glorified, C, majestic, etc. And part of the build-up to the viewing could perhaps have ESL students look up detailed definitions to better understand the nuance between different adjectives in the English language. For a more advanced class, the question could be more open-ended, asking for a short paragraph on the topic of music in general. Another example question might be, what is the director wanting to convey by filming large crowds of German citizens, laborers, soldiers, and professionals? Here the student would hopefully draw the link to the bandwagon technique, the sense of belonging, and showing plain folks as buying into Nazism. I imagine that sort of stuff as kind of the deeper meaning, pointing to the images in the film and understanding how they support some argument made by the director. These again can be much more generative and open-ended, short answer style questions, or you could make them multiple choice word bank type stuff depending on the real level of literacy and writing skills of your ESL students. And finally, if the class is outgoing and creative, an interesting group activity could be for them to produce their own piece of propaganda around some made-up issue in and around the school. Students would be expected to decide on which propaganda techniques they would like to key on, generate and edit a script, act and film the propaganda short, and finally present it to class. This could be several classes worth of material, a sort of mini unit on propaganda. In the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy, the author notes that film study classes, the ESL students were comfortable with the notion of author subjectivity, but hesitated to question specific texts in discussion or writing. By turning it around on them and making them content creators, we're forcing them to come face to face with this subjectivity in arguments, just stuff that ESL students generally have difficulties with. To conclude, I think it's about being reflexive with the sort of unit I've described. I think it could work with other films, but it'll really come down to the level of abilities of the ESL students and the execution of the teacher to ensure that it is just difficult enough to challenge, but not difficult enough to dismay and discourage.
Thank you.
Okay, so with this class we wanted to focus on how to teach the origins of World War II. By highlighting these various forms of history, we can use audio and visual techniques to educate students in a second language. The project-based approach allowed more students to be engaged in the subject matter while listening to the content in another language and by practicing this language directly. So these techniques of history allow specific although specific to this time period, can be adapted to any time period and to a different content area. So to wrap up this presentation from class, we had Joey that explained that students will be involved or more involved in class by being able to explain themselves and integrate their personal histories into the classroom. As Anna highlighted, there was the importance of student involvement and creativity, allowing students to express themselves in a more planned way that would make them more comfortable over the long run. And finally, Mike showed how film could be used to demonstrate and learn academic and English language. So thank you so much for your participation in class. I hope you have a great day.